Jacomien, over to you. Thank you so much. She is on for a second time for us.
Thank you, everybody, for listening twice to me. I've exhausted my econometric skills with the first paper, so this is a bit less econometrics, more pictures. It feels to me that, Harris has done very much justice to the introduction of this presentation, measuring accessibility to jobs for land use policies within urban areas, using the city of Cape Town as a case study. Because it focuses on what he mentioned about explaining the problem. So being sure of what is the objectives, what is the problem that you want to explain, explaining the effects. So it provides a quantitative methodology that explains the effect. And again, ensuring that there's alignment between different actors. So just keeping that discussion in mind when we're listening to the presentation. So I've mentioned it in my previous presentation, but we have a high unemployment rate, and this is the specific problem that we want to explain. South Africa is also a highly unequal country, highlighting the need for policies to address inequality. And in addition, it is expected that the share of people living within urban areas in South Africa will increase with 13% by 2050, resulting in an increased pressure to support the high housing and transport services required to accommodate these urbanization rates. So urbanization is nearly a prerequisite of growth. So the inability for cities to cope with the high influx with the high influx of urban residents, such as the lack of responding to higher housing needs, transport and other services needs, as a result of urbanization can lead to lower firm productivity. Firms and urban population experience diseconomies of agglomeration due to the higher congestion, higher housing prices, population and other externalities. So unplanned urban growth can lead to congestion as income increases. This can lead to self-reinforcing effects of sprawl to escape the congestion, which is a very anti-poor policy and can erode the benefits of cities. So on average, we see that people in Africa spend 55% more on housing and 40% more on transport compared to other developing countries and other continents. So African cities are not really capitalizing on the benefits of higher urbanization. So how can we make sure that our cities are more productive? So in a working paper by the African Growth Initiative at Brookings, they identified 3 factors which influences productivity within an urban area. Firstly, the role of public sectors to plan and invest in sound spatial and transport policies. The business environment that impacts on productivity. And lastly, which is the focus of this paper, is accessibility constraints, which will be the focus of this paper. So what is accessibility? So the ease, there's many definitions. One of them is the ease with which any land use activity can be reached from a location using a particular transportation system, or the potential of opportunities for interaction. But accessibility is a multidimensional concept encompassing proximity, as well as connectivity and mobility. So proximity, and this again is the focus of this paper, refers to the closeness of individuals to essential destinations, including jobs, educational institutions, healthcare facilities, and retail options, for example. The ease of reaching these destinations significantly influences the quality of life and economic opportunities available for these individuals. And Geers and Van Veer has done a lot of research in terms of accessibility, states that proximity is a critical factor that shapes an individual's ability to access activities and services effectively. The second one is connectivity, which involves the quality of the transportation networks, but also in recent times also accounts for connectivity with regards to IT and technology. And then lastly, mobility relates to the physical ability to move through transportation systems. So factors influencing mobility include travel speed, frequency of services, reliability, affordability of transportation options, which is quite a large focus in accessibility analysis. So Assessing accessibility provides valuable insights into spatial equity and the distribution of resources within urban areas. And by analyzing how different population segments experience accessibility, planners can identify disparities that may exist between various socioeconomic groups. As mentioned, much focus has been given to improvements of mobility to increase accessibility in many cities. We've heard about, the spatial equilibrium model that focuses on the introduction of the BRT or the collapse of the rail system. However, improving mobility in isolation with land use policies can be problematic. If not properly planned, improved transport by increasing mobility can drive more lower dense housing developments and sprawl. Sprawl again puts more pressure on the transportation system and other utility services that needed to provide the population residing far from the opportunities. So thus effective land use planning with particular densities, specifically for urban areas facing high urbanization rates, should be acknowledged, that only focusing on mobility improvements will not necessarily improve accessibility in the long run. And this paper focuses on proximity to improve accessibility. So how do we plan effectively? To improve proximity, and what indicators can be used to practically address accessibility within our spatial policies? Well, we have many goals and agendas, frameworks and guides to help us plan. So from an international perspective, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 11, that follows the goal of making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, and which also resulted in a new urban agenda adopted by South Africa in 2016 for the purpose of guiding our national documentation, such as the National Development Plan and Integrated Urban Development Framework. So there's a shared vision of this agenda that represents the better and more sustainable future, and in which all people have equal rights and access to benefits and opportunities that cities can offer, and in which the international community reconsiders the urban system and the physical form of our urban spaces, and to achieve this. Looking nationally, in the National Development Plan, a chapter focuses on transforming human settlements and the national space economy. And this document highlights that South Africa's towns and cities are highly fragmented, imposing high costs on individuals and the economy. So they also say since 1994, densities have increased in some urban areas. That has also been partial regeneration of inner cities, but coupled with the growth of housing ownership. But overall, there's limited progress that has been made in substantial spatial and reversing the apartheid geography. So these elements are reflected in a substantive spatial vision for towns and cities. And urban sprawl should be contained and possibly reversed as denser forms of development are more efficient in terms of land usage, infrastructure cost, and environmental protection. Take a more local view, specifically focusing on the city of Cape Town, just for the sake of this paper. We have a human settlement strategy that finds well-located housing and housing located on land that is in close proximity to economic opportunities, spatial nodes, and transportation nodes and social facility support. We have our ITP that mentions the importance of acknowledging that transport and spatial planning cannot be done in isolation. But what I'd like to focus on is the spatial development framework for the city of Cape Town. And it's focused on TOD, so I have a high focus on TOD. The spatial framework specifies three spatial strategies, of which the first one is actually a spatial strategy emphasizing the fostering of economic growth and expanding access to economic opportunities. So this approach is intended to reduce poverty and support thriving local economies by integrating land use and transportation planning. However, while this spatial development framework highlights these goals and strategies, it lacks specific data-driven tools or defined indicators to measure the impact of spatial and transport policies on economic inclusivity or accessibility across different income groups. They mentioned the monitoring and evaluation framework that includes spatial data and indicator framework. However, this framework does not specify which data sources will be used, what indicators will be tagged, or how this metric will be applied to address inequalities. So this omission indicates a gap in actionable insights needed to evaluate socioeconomic impacts of these policies. So although goals, visions, and plans argue densification, in reality, unplanned sprawl is still highly prominent with a lack of indicators to illustrate the benefit of proposed developments, as well as the impact of sprawl on the economy. We see this in the city of Cape Town. I'm not going to go into the statistics with regards to the impacts on transportation as what I did in the previous presentation, but the impact on transportation cost in terms of congestion in the city, in terms of the dependence of road-based public transport, the impact of that on congestion. But we also see on the right-hand side, this is a figure from the spatial development framework showing where the building footprint, developed over years. And we can see that the development is still following the trend of development close to the urban edge. The city of Cape Town, like many rapidly growing urban areas around the world, faces significant challenges in meeting the housing needs of its expanding population. They estimate that the city, that more than half of all new homes built between 2020 and 2040 will be informal, and that land invasion are likely to increase in line with socioeconomic trends. So with the growing number of low-income households struggling to find affordable housing, the pressure on the local government to address these issues have intensified. So there has been an increasing call for land, the release of land for the development of affordable housing close to employment hubs. And one of these examples is the release of military land for affordable housing in Cape Town. And we find newspaper articles mentioning the following. So there's sites, these military land, unutilized military land, is within 10 kilometer radius from the CBD and close to major transportation routes and services. The geographical advantages make them perfect for affordable housing. They also mention properties like Wingfield and Eysterplaat, adjacent to century cities, ideally located for such developments, offering proximity to economic nodes, schools and public transport. The question that I find is how well located is it in compared to locations where informal housing or unplanned residential growth takes place? And they also state these mega properties currently underutilized could create up to 100,000 affordable housing opportunities. But what should be the densities and what is the impact of these different densities? And lastly, as Cape Town grapples with housing shortages and urban sprawl, the success of this initiative could set a precedent for using public land to address social needs, fostering a more inclusive and equitable cityscape. But what is the impact on development or inclusiveness and equity? These are the problems. So this paper focuses on a methodology using new data to assess the impact of land use policy using the Cape Town, Wingfield and ERSA proposed affordable housing development as a case study. Firstly, we want to understand the changes in travel time, accessibility and network flow, so a mismatch between where people live and where people work between 2014 and 2020 in the city of Cape Town. We also want to compare accessibility between the Wingfield area and Khayelitsha Mitchell's Plain, which is considered a low accessibility location. And then also understand the impact of accessibility for a hypothetical relocation of workers or households to the Wingfield ERSA proposed housing development to gain insight into densities, accessibility reporting and distributional effects. So the use of this new data makes a considerable contribution in the time and money spent on calculating the accessibility changes. So although this methodology is considered as providing insights on a conceptual level without taking into account spatial equilibrium effects, it does provide a quantitative measure to report on accessibility changes given certain land development proposals. I'm not going to go into too much detail in terms of the data, but it's basically the same data that's been used for the other paper. For accessibility analysis, you need three types of data sources. You need to know where the jobs are and use the spatial tax data for that, for the years tax years 2013, 2014, as well as 2019, 2020. We again use the CSIR population data on mesozone level, and again we allocate this population data so that we have a data set where we have all employment and population data on hexagon level. And then again, we use the TomTom road network data, again for 2014 and 2019, to derive travel time matrices using ArcGIS Pro and Flow Map. So we have the travel time between all hexagons during the free flow speed conditions and during congested speed conditions. So since employment and transport data is collected consistently collected using the same methodology over different time periods, which we haven't had before. This data makes it possible for the first time to conduct accessibility analysis over time, having the ability to compare changes changes between different years or different speed conditions. As mentioned, the data is in different spatial forms. However, the end result is all data is on hexagon level. What accessibility measures do we use? But firstly, the proximity coefficient calculates the rate at which jobs can be reached from a specific hexagon. So this is a relative measure and useful in comparing accessibility between different areas or population groups. It calculates the area under the cumulative graph divided by the total area indicated by this rectangle, which is basically if you would have been able to reach all jobs within 60 minutes. So referring back to the elements of accessibility, connectivity, mobility, and proximity, this accessibility measure is chosen as it provides a good measure for evaluating proximity, hence the name. So secondly, the cumulative opportunity index or contour measure was used to calculate the number of jobs that can be reached within a specific travel time threshold. So such as what percentage of jobs can be reached within a 30-minute travel time. This method is preferred as the result can be easily interpreted, which makes it a good indicator to incorporate into public policy frameworks. However, the proximity coefficient allows to have not to choose an arbitrary threshold, which makes it better, and is more appropriate to comparison of accessibility over time or between different travel time conditions. Firstly, we look at the net worker flow. So for each hexagon, the number of jobs in that hexagon is deducted by the number of employed living in that hexagon. It gives an indication of the net inflow or outflow of workers within the hexagon and an indication of the mismatch between housing and work locations, overall employed and by wage bands. So this is a measure for 2014 as well in maroon and 2020 in gold. Overall, it indicates that the net outflow of workers increased on average between 2014 and 2020. It also indicates that workers within the lowest income bands experience a higher net outflow of workers compared to the higher income, giving an indication of spatial inequality within our city. The proximity coefficient was calculated under free flow speed and congested speed conditions for both 2014 and 2020. And the table provides changes in overall accessibility. So with the figures indicating that accessibility distribution spatially. So this gives an indication of how accessible employment opportunities are when living in a specific hexagon. So don't get confused by the previous presentation where it was from the point of view of the job locations, how accessible is the jobs within a specific location. This is the opposite or the inverse. So it shows the accessibility when you live in the specific hexagon, how accessible are jobs to be reached. So the change in accessibility under free flow speed conditions between 2014 and 2020 did not change much, with most accessible areas to reside to be close to the CBD. So under congested speed conditions, accessibility is severely impacted, with areas in the Metro Southeast, which is considered low income, reaching accessibility levels of more than half of that of the locations closer to the CBD. So overall, accessibility during AMP decreased with 7% between 2014 and 2020, which is also consistent with the results in terms of travel time in my previous paper. So focusing on the case study, as mentioned, we used the proposed Wingfield ERSA plot area to indicate changes in accessibility given this development. The Wingfield area is situated approximately 10 kilometers from Cape Town CBD and the secondary employment hub for Bellville. It is also situated close to existing BRT and railway stations. This land was donated by the Grafs Trust to government for military use more than 80 years ago and currently being managed by the Department of Defense. So because of its central location, an area has received a lot of attention from non-governmental organizations and land activists for the development of affordable housing. So first, we conduct a comparison in travel times and accessibility between the Wingfield area and Khayelitsha Mitchell's Plain, which is identified as one of the areas with the high population densities and poor accessibility to employment opportunities. So the figure on the left indicates the rate at which jobs can be accessed from each of these locations, with employees residing in the Wingfield area able to reach almost all jobs within the city within 30 minutes travel time under free flow speed conditions, compared to residents in the Khayelitsha area only able to reach a very small amount of jobs within the same travel time threshold. On the right, it indicates the travel time differences on the free flow speed condition and congested speed conditions. It shows that residents in the Khayelitsha Mitchells Plain area travel about 10 minutes longer on average compared to being located in the Wingfield area. This equates to an almost 9-hour saving in monthly travel time per commuter. But we see that under congested speed conditions, individuals within the Khayelitsha Mitchells Plain area are more severely affected by congestion, showing a 20-minute difference with regards to travel time. So there are other aspects that must be kept in mind. As people spend less on transport, they spend more on other products and services. This can help the multiplier. They have more time available for other activities. The household has more access to other opportunities and benefits that the city offers. All other advantages of the city now comes to the forefront, namely labor being more effective, reduction of carbon emissions, less need for transport, better utilization of public transport, etc. So the results of my previous paper presented earlier on the impact of commute times and labor market effects can also be incorporated into economic evaluations and spatial equilibrium models seeking to determine the effects of land use interventions to improve proximity and mobility. This is comparing free flow speed conditions and congested speed conditions using the contour method. So what's the percentage of jobs that can be reached within a 30 minutes travel time? And we see that individuals in Khayelitsha have access to less than 20% of all jobs in 2020 compared to individuals living in the Wingfield area, which has access to more than 70% of jobs within the same travel time threshold. This indicates that the spatial inequalities as a result of poor spatial planning, as well as the effect of congestion on marginalized communities located on the outskirts of the city, are more severe. Lastly, looking at the relocation scenario testing. So the Wingfield ERSA plot development for affordable housing is used as a case study, but we need to, because it's a hypothetical relocation to account for affordable housing within the Wingfield area, we use the relocation of employees within the wage bands between 1 and 5, which is earning between 1 and 6,400 Rand per month. It is important to assess the accessibility for specific wage groups, given the desired policy outcomes, since the distribution of jobs and residents for different wage groups are vastly different, which is a result in different accessibility outcomes. So as you will see in the graphs here, the location of jobs for specific wage bands is different, and as well as the residential location. The grey areas gives an indication of the employment growth within these areas between 2014 and 2020, indicating that the growth is also different for jobs in different wage bands. So given that this case study is focused on the use of land of affordable housing, so we allocate only low wage workers, and in the scenario are depicted in this table below. So there's 3 scenarios: low density, within the Wingfield area, medium density, as well as high density. And this relates to the Red Book guidelines in terms of dwelling units per hectare. So the relocation of, for example, 30,000 employed from the Khayelitsha Mitchells Plain to the Wingfield area will result in a 41 dwelling units per hectare. The medium density is 50,000 employed, relocated, that results in a 69 dwelling units per hectare, and then a high density results in 100 dwelling units per hectare. So the results, the case study seeks to determine the differentiated impact of accessibility given the proposed design densities within the Wingfield area. So different travel time thresholds, as well as the effect of all employment versus reporting on the improvement on specifically the employed grouping earning between 1 and 6,400 Rand per month. So from the conclusions we can derive from the scenario testing, that it's very important to report on a specific demographic and socioeconomic group, which the policy objective was focused on. The results indicate that only reporting on accessibility improvements over all employment, or the average for the entire city, the results doesn't show significant improvements. However, given specific policy outcomes, for example, improving accessibility for low-income earners to reach a specific number of jobs as a result of land use changes, it is crucial to report specifically on that group of individuals. The results indicate that wage earners within the wage bands 1 to 5 will experience increased access of 0.9% to almost 7, being able to access 7% more jobs, total jobs under the scenario 3. It is important to understand also the impact of different travel time thresholds, as it can provide different outcomes. Given that analysis is purely focused on proximity, using a free flow speed condition of 15-minute threshold is a reasonable travel time benchmark. Under travel time, 20-minute travel time, the effect is the highest, with an improvement of 7.2% of more jobs that can be accessed within that specific wage band. And then lastly, the results stress the effect of higher densities on employment outcomes, accessibility outcomes. And so it's very important to understand the impact of density. So although scenario 3 is on the lower boundary of the proposed high density development, the results indicate that overall accessibility to employment will show significant improvements given the prioritization of high density developments.
So, Jacomien,
I think
the time is technically up. So would you just wrap up for us, please? Thanks.
Yes, I'm not going to go through all the inclusion, but I just want to focus on the impact on the mismatch between where people live and work. There's been an increase in the net outflow. There's been a reduction of accessibility over time. Some areas are more affected with congestion than others, showing the spatial inequalities. A significant improvement in accessibility for workers located within the Wingfield area. And housing development and land use assessment is different, so the factors need to be considered. So what is the objective? Who needs to be benefited? What is the problem? Also using the different travel time thresholds, what is the impact of measures and what can we use to assess the impacts, and the fact that density matters. And the ability in terms of the contribution is the assessment over time, the quantitative results that can be incorporated in multi-criteria analysis and cost-benefit analysis. It's more cost and time effective approach and can also inform more detailed analysis. Okay, I'm going to skip the last slide.
Okay, thank you so much. Unless there's something burning that can't go offline with Jacomien, maybe by email, I'd prefer for us to move on. Jacomien, I will be distributing your email address because I think there are a lot of people that would want to discuss this work with you. So, if that's all right.
No problem.
Great stuff. Thank you so much.